Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of May 10th, 2021. I'd like to call the members to order. Although this meeting is being held virtually, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which Ottawa is built is unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and the land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable contributions to this land. Members are reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this subcommittee, residents may still make submissions to Planning Committee and Council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator by calling 613-580-2424, extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. Colleagues, I've received no regrets for today's meeting, but Councillor Brockington did provide some notification that he'll be 10 minutes late. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they're called.
Member Halsell.
Here, thank you.
Member Podolsky.
Yes, present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Apologies, Councillor. Member Conforti.
Here.
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Vice Chair Quinn.
Present.
And Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Barry?
Yes, on the item relating to 197-201 Wilbrod Street, I'm the architect for that project, and I would like to declare interest on that item. Thank you.
Thank you for your declaration. Are the minutes of Tuesday, April 12th, 2020 confirmed? Confirmed. So our first items deal with planning, infrastructure, economic development, right-of-way, heritage, and urban design services. But before we begin, a reminder for members and the public on the scope of this committee's mandate. All heritage applications before us today are subjected to applications under the Planning Act. The purview of the Built Heritage Subcommittee is to evaluate these applications under the Ontario Heritage Act and determine whether the proposed alterations are appropriate and compatible with the heritage values of the properties. For 70 Richmond Road, the question is whether the proposed alterations to the Champlain Oil Service Center are compatible and conserve the heritage value of the building. The Built Heritage Subcommittee does not have the authority around compatibility beyond the designated property, as there are no heritage requirements related to height or character along Richmond Road or Island Park Drive. For properties designated under Part 5 of the Act, and these include 126 York Street and 311 Somerset Street, the question is whether the proposed alteration or new construction is appropriate in the Heritage Conservation District and whether the application meets the relevant guidelines and policy. General direction regarding height and density is set through the official plan and zoning bylaw. And concerning 197 Wilbrod Street, which will be subjected to an application for new construction at a future meeting of Built Heritage Subcommittee, the question before the committee today is related to demolition only. So we'll start with our first file, an application to alter 70 Richmond Road, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a technical amendment proposed by Heritage staff to replace document 7 in this report with a revised version. Could the mover, Vice Chair Quinn, please read the motion?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Whereas the applicant advises that the interim location of the building has changed, and whereas the applicant has confirmed that the risk level remains the same for the integrity of the structure, and whereas the revised document 7, dated April 30th, 2022, reflects the new interim location for the building, and whereas the changes have no impact on the recommendations of the report, therefore be it resolved that the report ACS 2022 PIE RHU 0017 be amended by replacing document 7, conservation plan, with the version dated April 30th, 2022, a copy of which is on file with the city clerk.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn, for placing that technical amendment on the floor. Can staff now please provide an overview of this report?
Thank you. Good morning. Through you, Chair. Sorry, I'll just wait for the slides to come up. Thanks, Eric. So this item concerns the application to alter 70 Richmond Road, known as the Old Champlain Oil Service Station. It is a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it is located in the Westboro neighborhood. The proposed alterations include the on-site relocation and rehabilitation of the service station, as well as its integration into a 9-story mixed-use mid-rise building containing 85 residential apartment units, ground floor retail, and a 2-level underground parking garage. The application before you relates to the heritage permit, and matters related to the associated zoning and official plan amendment applications for this property will be considered by Planning Committee on June 9th. The applicant also intends to apply for a grant under the Heritage Community Improvement Program to assist with conservation costs, and a report to consider that will come before Built Heritage Subcommittee at a subsequent date. Next slide, please. So you'll see here that the subject property is located on the southwest corner of Richmond Road and Island Park Drive. It is bounded by low-density residential dwelling units that front onto Island Park Drive to the south and east, and Bassett Lane to the west. This section of Richmond Road historically contained automotive uses, some of which remain and some of which have been recently redeveloped into mixed-use buildings. In addition to 70 Richmond Road, the proposed development also includes the acquisition and demolition of the existing house to the south, located at 376 Island Park Drive. This property does not have heritage status. Next slide, please. So the existing service station is a stucco-clad building constructed in 1934 and designed with a steeply pitched gable roof, round arch doors and windows, and twin chimneys, resembling an English cottage. It is made up of 3 distinct components. There is the commercial portion, the office portion in the middle, and then the service bays. It was designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act by City Council in 2019 as a rare example of a 1930s service station, as well for its association with the growth in private car ownership in the early 20th century, and its contextual location on Richmond Road, which was the historic western gateway to the city. At the time of designation, Council recognized its location on the lot would make adaptive reuse difficult and acknowledged that relocating it could be an appropriate part of the site's redevelopment. Next slide, please. So here are a few photos of the service station that show its existing condition. The property has been vacant for a number of years now with no maintenance undertaken on the building. There was a structural assessment of the building submitted as part of the conservation plan that determined it to be in poor to fair condition, but sufficiently stable to relocate as a single unit with an acceptable level of risk. Next slide, please. This slide shows several components of the proposed development. The image on the bottom right, you'll see the service station's existing location on the property and its proposed location on the northeast portion of the site. The building will be stabilized, lifted, removed from its existing foundation, and then temporarily relocated to a property across the street, which is shown with a red footprint at the top right. And then following the construction of the proposed underground parking garage, the service station will be lifted and relocated to its permanent location on the site. So on the site plan, you'll see the relocated service station with exposed east and north elevations that are integrated into a ground floor commercial unit shown in pink. A landscaped plaza is proposed to wrap the northeast corner of the property, helping to highlight the service station. Next slide, please. This slide shows a rendering of the northeast corner of the property and the north and east elevations. The applicant has worked with heritage staff to include several interventions in the design of the building, some visible in these images, to ensure that it is compatible with the service station. And some of these include the incorporation of step backs along the north, east, and south elevations to provide the service station with 3-dimensional space, a 6-meter ground floor to match the height of the service station, clad in stone to appear as a backdrop, a spandrel panel to highlight the service station's bays, and a landscape plaza, as mentioned earlier, to improve the public's ability to interact with the service station. Next slide, please. So several standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada are applicable to this proposal. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal meets them for several reasons. Firstly, the entire building will be conserved and rehabilitated, with its character-defining elements evaluated, repaired, and maintained. The relocation of the building to the northeast corner of the property in the same east-west orientation will help maintain its commercial, office, and service bay components. And this will help identify the building's original use as a service station along Richmond Road. And lastly, the proposed design sets the service station proud of the mid-rise building, allowing it to remain the dominant feature on the site, and employs materiality and datum lines to ensure that the addition is distinguishable and subordinate from the heritage resource. Next slide, please. So in terms of consultation, the application submission materials were posted on the city's development application search tool. Heritage Ottawa, neighbors within 30 meters, and the Island Park Drive and Westboro community associations were also notified of the application. And Chair King and Councillor Lieber are also aware of the application. Next slide, please. Heritage staff are recommending approval of the application to relocate and rehabilitate the Champlain Oil Service Station and integrate it into a 9-story building with several conditions to secure a letter of credit, ensuring that the protection, conservation, and restoration of the building is completed prior to the issuance of a building permit, as well as a condition to implement the conservation measures as outlined in the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement and the Conservation Plan, a condition to ensure that the other required planning applications are approved, and also a condition to further identify any interventions that would be required for the south and west facades to facilitate the use of the building as a commercial unit. Heritage staff are also requesting that authority be delegated for minor design changes and that the heritage permit be approved with a 3-year expiry date. Next slide, please. That concludes this staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise, for that very detailed report. It's much appreciated. On this file, we did get 2 letters, 2 items of correspondence, including from Heritage Ottawa, both in support. And we do have a number of registered speakers for this file, starting with Robert Wells from Trinity. So I don't know if Robert has joined us.
He's coming online now, Chair. He would need to accept the prompt. Oh, I think he's joining the panelists now.
Excellent. And I see that Councillor Brockington has also joined us, so welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Mr. Wells. We can hear you, and you do have 5 minutes to address the subcommittee.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of committee. As was alluded to, my name is Rob Wells with Trinity Development Group, and I am joined today, I guess he's sort of identified as the second speaker, but Jon Stewart, who's with Commonwealth Historic Resource Management, and is our heritage consultant on this particular file. So if there is particular questions about the applications or aspect of the heritage component, he's available to go through that or walk through that. I don't necessarily have any sort of presentation or formal presentation prepared, but I did want to note that we're certainly in support of the recommendations that are outlined in staff's report, and definitely want to extend a thank you to Lewis and city staff for all their efforts in getting the application to the state. For those that are not aware, this has been an application that we have been working on since October of 2020. And we're certainly looking forward to advancing this application to the next steps. I guess, starting with our site plan application and then in future, bringing this redevelopment fully to life. So if there are particular questions, and I don't know if this is necessarily the forum to discuss the official plan amendment and zoning component, I'm certainly available for that. But just wanted to sort of go on record and say that we're in support of the recommendations, and I myself am available for any further questions on where we're at in the process. And as I noted, I have Jon Stewart with me, who can walk through some of the more intricate details of the heritage components if there are any specific requests or questions.
We appreciate those comments, Rob. And are there any questions to Rob from committee members? Seeing none, thank you. And I was just curious Whether Jon as well had a presentation, or whether he was just jointly appearing with you, Rob.
I think he's jointly just sort of joining. I don't believe that he has any sort of presentation prepared formally, because I think that there's been quite a bit of communication with Lewis's team, et cetera, as we've worked our way through the process. But I'm not sure if he's already identified as a speaker and has the ability to speak while I'm.
Yes, he does. So that's why I was just curious, just to see if we could save time.
Yeah.
You know, but thank you for that.
No problem.
Chairman King, I thank you for the opportunity, but I'm here to answer questions.
Okay, excellent. So I see no questions from committee. So thank you both, Rob and Jon, for your appearance here. The next registered speaker is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. And we'll just await his joining the call.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Could I just get one point of clarification from Ms. Quinn's motion? What exactly does that change? Is there someone that could explain that? Perhaps Mr. Juarez could.
Yeah, I'll permit the planner on this file to address your question.
It just might have some effect on my comments. That's all.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Chair. So the change in the conservation plan is focusing on the change of the interim location of the service station. So initially the service station was to be relocated on Bassett Lane, just to the west. It's now going to temporarily be relocated across the street.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heritage Ottawa is pleased to support this application. The efforts to blend the existing Part 4 designated building with the new development date back to before the property was designated. Although Heritage Ottawa has been involved in the process since the beginning, we give full credit for the solution on how to preserve the former service station and integrate it into a new residential development to the proponent and their architect, community representatives, and city staff who collaborated on different design proposals over the past 5 years. We support the relocation of the existing building further north on the property and the setback of the new 9-story building, which permits the retention of the cultural heritage value and character defining features of the building. The heritage building's predominance on the property is enhanced, and it is better integrated into the streetscape. We are also pleased with the decision to move the building off its current foundation in one piece rather than attempting to dismantle it. We're pleased to hear that the proponent hopes to apply under the Heritage Community Improvement Program, grant program for assistance in this project. We therefore recommend that you support the staff recommendation for this proposal. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments. Does the committee have any questions for David? Seeing none, thank you, David, for your deputation. And our next registered speaker is Paul Forster from the Island Park Community Association.
slow to unmute. There we go. Thank you for letting us speak. I would like to speak on behalf of the Island Park Community Association and raise questions about the current proposal for relocating the gas station at 70 Richmond. The community's view is that this pits the development of the site against preservation of the parkway. And in recommending the relocation, a lot of mention is made of the connection of the gas station with Richmond Road, but not about its impact on the parkway. I know the focus of this committee, as the chair said, is on the enforcement of the Heritage Act, but to the extent that there is any heritage value tied to its contextual location, we think relocation of the gas station changes that value seriously, and we would like this committee to consider that in assessing the application. Slide number 2, please. The NCC says it's been building and managing parkways since 1899. It's that the parkways are a cultural landscape, that they link landmarks in the city, provide a gateway to the region and beautiful perspectives to the capital. We think as the link from Experimental Farm to Hampton Park and the Ottawa River, Island Park Drive is no less deserving of protection. And again, I make these remarks in the context of the contextual value of the gas station and its impact. That Island Park has retained much of its original character is no accident. It's been the result of investments by the NCC, residents, and the city. Slide 3, please. The residents have refurbished the houses rather than tear them down. Those that have rebuilt have preserved the streetscape. The NCC enforced covenants on the development of the parkway for 99 years, invested in stone gateways, cairns, street signs, decorative lighting, limited signage. It has forbidden hydro lines and other services, prohibited commercial vehicles, restricted access to the street, and invested in traffic calming. And it has invested heavily in landscaping with the maintenance and replacement of the trees. Slide 4, please. City Council has a long record of protecting the street too. When the covenants expired, it was planning staff that devised area-specific zoning to meet the community's request to preserve the setbacks of houses along Island Park Drive. My point is that all these investments were made to preserve the look, feel, and continuity of the parkway, safeguard its landscaping, maintain an unobstructed view of the boulevard. Slide 5, please. We think the Trinity development runs counter to these. Rather than confine the building to 70 Richmond, they acquired 376 Island Park Drive, which extends their frontage to 52 meters along Island Park Drive. That's 44% more than the 23-meter frontage on Richmond Road. This is supposed to be rezoned for traditional Main Street. The design curtails the setback from the boulevard. It removes greenery that separates Richmond Road from the parkway. It puts a 9-story building 3 meters from the house next door. That's 1 meter more than is required for social distancing during COVID. And the magnitude of these changes is evident in the fact that Trinity is seeking relief from almost all of the regulations that have governed the use, density, height, and setbacks. Again, I know this is not part of this committee's purview, but I think it's pertinent to the contextual value of the gas station. All of these changes that seem to us come at the expense of the look and feel of the parkway. Slide 6, please. So this brings us to the question before us, which is about the relocation of the gas station. It's no accident that the gas station currently aligns with the rear of the houses on Island Park Drive. I'm sorry, it's a grainy photo, but you can see it in the center there. We know that's part of the original plan for the parkway because all the other buildings have that same alignment. It's an integral part of the plan by Frederick Todd's design for the parkway. Even the new Mizrahi project, which is not pictured here, has that similar alignment. Slide 7, please. You can see that relocating the gas station to the northeast limit of the property moves it from behind the houses to well out in front of them. Slide 8, please. This allows for the project to shift eastward as a whole, and that blocks the sight lines along the boulevard. So you can see the rear of the house, the front of the house, and then the limit of the new building. It replaces the greenery that's there with glass and steel. It creates a 9-story barrier that interrupts the continuity of the parkway. You can see that where it lines up with the streets, the houses that fronts to the north. That's what we're trying to prevent. Trinity's own architect, Barry Hoban, acknowledged the importance of the setbacks in his initial design, and he designed his initial presentation to respect them. So we think this is possible. We know it's not easy for this committee and that its focus is as limited to the heritage aspect, but whatever is permitted on this corner is going to set a precedent for the development on the other 2 sites. So we feel strongly that the challenges of intensification can be met without forgetting where we've come from. We believe we can have intensification in beautiful, healthy, meaningful urban environments too. We think allowing the relocation of the gas station to the northeast corner changes its contextual location, its heritage value insofar as it makes it from something compatible and an asset to something that competes and undermines the traditional contextual setting of the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, I did want to thank you for your deputation, and unfortunately you are correct today that the Built Heritage Subcommittee does not have the authority around compatibility beyond the designated property, as there are no heritage requirements related to height or character along Richmond Road or Island Park Drive. But thank you for placing your concerns as well as the concerns of the Community Association on the record. It's appreciated. So since we have gone through our list of registered speakers for this item, does the committee have any questions for staff? And I see that Councillor Moffat has raised his hand.
Yeah, just a quick one. That last presentation we just heard about the concern about taking the building from the back of the property, moving to the front of the property. I'm just curious, obviously down the road from here, we have the Ashcroft convent property, which put a big building in front of the convent. So it's back there, just don't really know it's back there. If we didn't allow the building to be moved to the front of the property, and knowing how much space is in this area in terms of the big parking lots fronting on the road, could something be permitted to be built in front of this old gas station?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So if the service station remained in situ and we received a development application for something that proposed it in front of it, it's something that we would have to evaluate the impact on. But certainly it would be difficult to be able to maintain the cultural heritage value, the contextual value along Richmond Road with a development in front of it.
Okay, so it's not, I mean, maybe it's not a good example because you can't, without the actual application in front of you, you can't really suggest one way or the other. But I just, I worry about that. I mean, I understand the rationale, but I also look at what we have, what our policies are in the city about development, about bringing development to the road front. And then we have 4 properties that have deep setbacks and a lot of parking, which seems to be the antithesis of what our OP calls for. So I get the concern about moving buildings around on a property, but I think in this context, I think it preserves the property in terms of its value to the street, but also allows the development of the property. But all right, thanks.
I appreciate that. I saw that Leslie raised her hand and then lowered it, so I didn't know if you wanted to intervene, Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Moffat got to what I was going to say, basically, so I don't need to say anything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I see that Vice Chair Quinn has her hand raised as well.
Thank you, Chair. My question, it just pertains to any implications and perhaps a little more information about the impact of the mature neighborhood overlay and if it does in fact impact this property.
Through you, Chair. So we do have colleagues in development review, Jean-Charles, who may be able to speak to that better.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. Chair, the mature neighborhoods overlay would apply to low-rise buildings, and the proposed building that is, or building that's proposed on site is a mid-rise 9-story building. So short answer, no, the mature neighborhoods overlay would not apply to this building.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Seeing no other questions, do any of the members have comments on this item? And I see Barry has raised his hand.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Just a very short comment. I think that I support the motion, the staff recommendation, and I think that the staff rationale drafted by here and the comments by Heritage Ottawa capture the context and the benefits of this proposal from the Ontario Heritage Act perspective. And I'm very, very pleased to see how they were in sync with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. And are there any other comments from the committee? I don't see any hands raised, so I would just want to build upon what Barry was saying. When the building was designated, council recognized its location on the lot would make adaptive reuse difficult and acknowledged that relocating it would be an appropriate part of the site's redevelopment. The applicant proposes here to relocate the historic building to a new foundation and then integrate the west and south facades with the mid-rise's ground floor retail space. The mid-rise ground floor height matches that of the service station and would be clad in stone to ensure the station has prominence. As well, a glass volume that was initially proposed to sit atop the service station from stories 2 to 9 has been removed with the latest design. That will ensure the station reads as a freestanding rather than simply as a facade. Finally, the proposed landscape plaza wraps around the service station to highlight the building, give it space in the foreground. The historic building would also project more than 2 meters in front of the new building, which features step backs as well, all to help ensure additional prominence to the service station. Staff has noted, and we saw this in the report, that the application is consistent with the standards and guidelines of the conservation of historic places in Canada and have no objection to the proposed approach, which they consider would ensure protection of the historic building. Obviously, we've heard some concerns about the impact, the heritage impact on parkways, but of course, we don't have jurisdiction over that area. So as a consequence, I'll also be supporting this application. Is the amending motion that was placed on the floor today carried?
Carried.
Carried.
And is the report itself carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. So this report will be submitted to Planning Committee on June 9th, 2022. Our next file focuses on an application for new construction at 311 Somerset Street West and 234, 236 O'Connor Street, properties designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, located in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning, everyone. I'll just wait for the slides to appear on the screen. All right, so as mentioned, this is an application for new construction at 311 Somerset Street West, as well as at 234 and 236 O'Connor Street. Properties are designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. These properties are designated under Part 5 of the Act as part of the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. As you can see on the map, the property is located on the north side of Somerset Street West at the corner of O'Connor Street. This proposal will include 3 lots, 311 Somerset Street West and 234 and 236 O'Connor Street. Next slide. These properties are all vacant and as such are not contributing properties in the HCD. Some committee members may recall an application to demolish 234 O'Connor, a red brick front gable house that was before committee and council in 2016. This building was demolished in 2018 and has been used as a park since. Next slide. This is an application for construction of an 18-story residential building over 3 properties. The proposed building will have a 4-story podium and a 14-story tower, including 156 dwelling units and ground floor commercial space. There will be a below-grade garage accessed off O'Connor Street. The ground floor will be made up of glazing divided by brick walls with punched windows on the floors 2 to 4. The podium will be 4 stories in height and will be clad in red brick. The articulation of the podium is inspired by the volumes found on Somerset Streetscape and includes some inset balconies. The tower will be set in 6.5 meters from Somerset Street and will be clad in gray metal panels and curtain wall glazing. A terrace is proposed on the top of the podium and will be set back from the roof's edge. Balconies are proposed on the east and west elevations of the tower. The proposed building will cover nearly the entire lot. Accordingly, very little soft landscaping is proposed on the site. Street trees will be planted along O'Connor Street, and planters will be installed along the north property line on the drive aisle. This proposal also requires an official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, an application for site plan control, which have been submitted concurrently. Next slide. Here are the elevations from each side, the east and west, as well as the rear, which is the north. Just to situate everyone, on the left-hand most image, Somerset Street runs along the left side of the image. In the center image showing the east facade, Somerset is on the right-hand side. And on the left, sorry, the right image, Somerset would be on the far side of the building. So we're seeing O'Connor Street on the left hand of the building there. Note that the tower is set on all sides in order to create a tower that is as slender as possible. Somerset Street has the largest step back above the podium, shown in the left and the center, at 6.5 meters from the podium's facade. The west has a step back of 3.5 meters and the east 2.1. The tower is set in 1.5 meters on the north from the edge of the podium with a total of 4.5 meters from the lot line. An enclosed drive aisle is located on the north and wraps around the back of the podium. Next slide. This project has evolved tremendously from the early submissions as seen from left to right. While 9 stories is permitted at Somerset Street, staff felt that this was not in keeping with the low-rise character of Somerset Village. The middle portion of the building was therefore removed in order to make the tower smaller. This increased the step back along Somerset Street. Next slide. As part of the Centertown Heritage Conservation District study from 1997, City Council approved Heritage Conservation District guidelines. The guidelines in this document, along with the directions set out in the Centertown Community Design Plan and the policies set out in the official plan, including the Centertown Secondary Plan, serve as a basis for the evaluation of the proposed development. It is important to note that the planning context in Centertown HCD has changed since its designation in 1997, when significant new development was not contemplated. And it was recommended that heights of new buildings be capped at 3 to 4 stories. In this proposal, the podium will be 4 stories in height and has been designed to reflect the massing found in the Somerset streetscape. While the Queen Anne Revival houses are generally 3 stories in height, the podium on the proposal is 4 stories to match the volume of the building on the corner of Somerset and Bank Street, seen in the images on the screen. These 2 buildings will bookend the Victorian architecture found along Somerset Street. Characteristic of the Queen Anne Revival architecture is a variety of forms, varying roof lines, bay windows, and projecting bays. This is echoed in the podium of the proposed building. The inset balcony and punched windows evoke the exuberance of the Queen Anne Revival style and the pushing and pulling of the mass. Next slide. Given that the existing HCD guidelines do not contemplate high-rise development, but the Centertown Secondary Plan does, staff have focused the review on ensuring the base of the building is compatible with the character of the streetscape and the HCD, and that the tower portion of the building includes appropriate transition to the surrounding historic context. The recommendations in the HCD study related to residential new construction seek to ensure that infill projects respect the existing late 19th and early 20th century heritage character by balancing a design approach that is both sympathetic to the cultural heritage value of the HCD, but also contemporary and distinguishable as being new. This block of Somerset Street is known as Somerset Village, an intact streetscape with turn-of-the-century red brick residences converted to commercial space. The podium has been designed to be compatible with this streetscape by using red brick, punched windows, and similar volumes. The new building will also reestablish the continuous streetscape on Somerset Street West and O'Connor Street by infilling the existing vacant lot. This is recommended in the Centertown HCD study. Together with the chosen material palette of red brick, metal, and glass, as well as the use of elements such as traditional window designs and articulated massing, the building will integrate into the surrounding contributing properties rather than calling attention to itself. Next slide. In these close-up renderings of the podium, you can see how the mass of the podium is broken up by the inset balconies. By cutting out some of the mass on the 4th floor, this creates a more stepped roofline, linking back to the variety of roof profiles found in the Queen Anne Revival houses. In the image on the lower right, you can see the entrance to the below-grade garage. An enclosure set back from the street is proposed in order to mitigate light pollution and noise to the neighbors. Next slide. Staff have reviewed the proposal against the standards and guidelines, as well as the Centertown Secondary Plan and CDP, which include policies and guidelines to ensure that the conservation of Centertown's cultural heritage value, Staff are satisfied the proposal is consistent with these documents. The subject properties are currently vacant and therefore have little cultural heritage value within the HCD. By providing ground floor commercial use and upper floor residential, the proposed building maintains the associated cultural heritage value of Centertown HCD as a residential area surrounding Parliament Hill. The new construction will be visually compatible in terms of material palette with the HCD and clearly distinguishable from the surrounding historic buildings in form, massing, and details. While not subordinate in size, the podium has been carefully designed to respond to the character of the area, while the tower has been set in on all sides and clad in different materials as not to draw attention to itself. Accordingly, the proposal meets the applicable standards and guidelines. The Centertown Community Design Plan has guidelines for new buildings in the HCD, including using step backs to appropriately transition to adjacent building heights, using compatible materials, giving predominance to corner elements, and modulating facades through the use of inset balconies in a manner that is compatible with the surrounding heritage structure. The proposal meets the policies of the secondary plan and the CDP as the building's tower is set on all sides, uses brick on the podium, and is compatible material to the streetscape, and modulates the volume that is inset the balconies related to the neighboring buildings. A cultural heritage impact statement was also completed for this project, concluding that the 18 stories will have an impact on the low-rise character of the HCD. However, this is mitigated by the nearby taller buildings to the north and the design of the podium, which integrates into the Somerset Village streetscape. Next slide. In terms of consultation, both Heritage Ottawa and the Centertown Community Association have been notified of this application. The ward councillor has been notified, as were meters within 30 meters. Last slide, please. And recommendations, staff recommend to approve the application for new construction on the site and to delegate my design changes to the general manager of PRED, as well as to issue a heritage permit with a 3-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, for that very detailed presentation. The subcommittee did receive correspondence that was circulated, 2 letters that voiced concerns, as well as a letter from Heritage Ottawa that opposed the application. We do have a number of speakers registered to speak. It is important for us, of course, once again, to remember that the properties designated here under Part 5 of the Act, really the question for us is whether the proposed alteration of new construction is appropriate in the Heritage Conservation District and whether the application meets the relevant guidelines and policy. General direction regarding height and density is obviously set through the official plan and zoning bylaw. Our first registered speaker is for the applicant, and that's Roberto Campos from Figure Architects Collective. And he, I believe, is joined by Jon Stewart, Tim Bede, and Miguel Tremblay, and Josh Carre, who are there to answer questions. But my understanding is that the lead presentation will be brought to us by Roberto. So Roberto, if you've joined us, you do have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to fellow councillors, as part of the committee, the other members of this Built Heritage Committee. Certainly thank our planning staff and heritage staff who have been working with us over the past couple of years in developing this project. Certainly glad to see that Ashley prepared a very detailed presentation. I think a lot of the stuff that I prepared here today is very similar to what she's presented, but I think most importantly that what we really wanted to talk about is the story, how we've really gotten here. I think this proposal is a result of various design iterations, strengthened by the comments received from various discussions and presentations by our design team, to planning staff, to the councillor's office, who we've met multiple times, to presentations to the Urban Design Review Panel, heritage staff, community associations, and immediate neighbors. And so, as you can see through the timeline of this project, the development of the concept has evolved significantly over time, all with the goal of creating a strong anchor and positive contribution to the vibrancy of Somerset Village. For the most part, I think we're obviously very supportive of the report by heritage staff in this. I think for the most part, we're here to answer any questions Jon Stewart, our heritage consultant, who also worked with me and our staff in creating this concept, is available to answer questions related to the history, heritage, as well as members from FOTEN who are here to answer any questions regarding zoning. I think we can quickly go through the slides. Again, I think Ashley has done a great job of preparing a very detailed document. Go next slide. As you can see, the site, as she's mentioned, is an amalgamation of the 3 properties on the site that have the parking lot has been there since I believe this 70s, and so really this is not about taking away a building, but actually adding and contributing to the bookend of this site. Next slide. Just some views. I think we're all fairly familiar with the site, so this kind of shows you the view of the site from the various vantage points. Next slide. And then views outward from the site to the corners of the intersection and down the streets. Next slide. Again, always starting with massing studies just to kind of get a better sense of what's available as far as the build limitations of the site, purely from a zoning perspective, hydro perspective, setbacks, stuff like that. Next slide. Presentation, our first presentation to the urban design review, which was an informal presentation where we now layer in those massings with a heritage layer. You know, from that we took significant comments with regards to the 9-story portion, and then also the brick treatment. Next slide. Next slide. And from there, you know, what you'll see consistently throughout our concepts is always that public ground experience at the ground plane, but certainly taking all the comments that we receive from heritage staff, from planning staff, from the urban design review panel, and in this case, strong recommendations with regards to how do we articulate the podium more in a language that is better for the street. Next slide. Taking those, this is the formal UDRP presentation where we start to look at more of a vertical expression of the brick on the street, and then a different articulation of the podium. Next slide. In this case, adding more of a white box at the 9 stories, and then the tower above, all in an attempt in trying to create a series of step backs and building articulations. Again, taking comments from staff, from heritage staff, and from the urban design review panel in, you know, recommending removing the box, increasing the height of the podium to 4 stories, and bringing the tower right down to that podium. Next slide. From there, what we did, as I actually showed the diagram that we created, was really kind of looking at that northern streetscape, looking at what is existing as far as the vertical language, the articulation of windows, the volumes, the negatives versus solids, the datum planes, and ultimately creating a contemporary understanding and expression of what is happening on the street to really focus that podium design. Next slide. Which ultimately results in this proposal. Again, always the idea of the public realm at the ground plane as being vital to its integration, which is a continuity of the vibrancy that's happening on Somerset Street West with all the restaurants. I used to work at one of the houses just at 331 Somerset for about 10 years, so I know the street very well. But again, always looking at what is there in a contemporary expression. Next slide. Looking at, again, the idea of the bookending of this building to frame the heritage homes that are already on that northern facade. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. I think you've been seeing these already. Next slide. Next slide. Again, for us, the experience is always, what is it like here at this point, at the intersections, walking down the street, participating in the vibrancy of the restaurants, the patios, the articulation, the masonry. That has always been our focus in really creating this experience of the 4-story podium slide. Rest, again, the idea of the active entries to the residential, active entries to the commercial at the corner, whether supporting office spaces for the building or amenity areas, always being first and foremost fronted onto either O'Connor or on Somerset. Slide. Sorry, just the elevations that Ashley's already presented. So again, we're certainly very thankful to allow him to present today, and certainly to any questions that you may have to either myself or to our team. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, and I know that you have others from your team here to assist in answering questions, and you do have a question from Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to you, Mr. Compost. Thank you for your presentation. This question may seem minor in the grand scheme of things, but can you talk to me about how you acquire brick that is similar to the same color as the brick on nearby buildings, some of the heritage buildings? Is it your attempt to try and match the same color as best as possible?
I think that'll always be our #1 priority. Whether we're going to get the exact same brick that's been there for pretty close to 200 years is a very difficult task, I think. But we're certainly, as you can see in the tone that we've picked, it's, the volume of the building and the podium is still very contemporary, but the brick has got a sense of texture to it. And so, and a slight variation of color, which you can get. So I think that'll certainly be one of our big focuses, is looking at samples, looking at variations from sizes to the color of the grouting. That's certainly going to be an important part of our next steps as we start to finalize drawings, and certainly looking at how that matches up against the curtain wall, how it matches up against the colored metal trims and details.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And you also have a question from Member Hassel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A quick question regarding the material palette for this site. You made reference to a lot of brick, a lot of glass, a lot of metal. One of the other very dominant materials along Somerset Village is the use of wood in windows, wood in fascia, wood in molded elements, wood in the porches. So I was wondering if you could just elaborate on the choice to omit wood from the material palette on this building.
Right. So, it's a little bit, we'd love to. The other balance that as an architect team that we always look at is obviously the limitations of the building code, and so certainly things like non-combustible construction, and which is what is really required for this building, is going to take precedence. And so, the one section where we show, the soffits being in wood, ultimately may not be real wood. Like we're going to be looking at a steel material that looks like wood, in order to make sure that we're always meeting the requirements of the building code with regards to exposed combustible material, especially when it comes to residential buildings. That it certainly gets a lot more stringent, which is very different than, let's say, commercial buildings, the commercial office buildings. And so, I think the one thing where we are going to be exploring it is certainly in the interior design of the public spaces, like the lobby entries and stuff like that. I think wood is always going to be an important part of our goals, but we're ultimately going to be limited.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And Councillor McKinney has raised their hand.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Just a question. I know we've had many discussions on this application, and just from a heritage perspective, it's different from a planning perspective, of course, but the issue of the black cladding that is a concern for the neighbor to the north. Can you just speak to why there was no, from your perspective, no way of softening that, rather, even with brick on the garage, and this is the garage portion that I'm referring to. Yeah, somehow softening that contrast for the homes, directly to the north within meters, really.
Right. So to be very honest, I think the material that's on there right now is really, we have to pick a material relevant of color. So we have to pick a material, in this case, what is going to be basically what we call in the industry a freezer panel. It's like an industrial panel that comes as a component. It's insulated. It's got its own insulation. It basically fastens right onto the structure directly. And a lot of that is just the limitations of where structure is in relation to the property line, because we are fairly close to the property line on that side, and making sure that we don't build an envelope there that is very, very thick, or we end up being over the property line, and we're trying to maintain the balance of where foundations are below in order to make the parking garage work. So it's a bit of that's kind of what's really created or made the decision for us to use that particular material. The color, I think, when we put it in, was really just to try to maintain that tone that's already around the building, the brick, and that color that's already around it, the detailing. So I think that's really where that came from. We tried to soften it along the northern facade by including a brand new cedar fence, which would go up, in this case, we're limited to the 7 feet, as a way of creating a bit of that backdrop against that metal panel for the northern neighbors. Can it be changed? Absolutely. I think color, is something we can look at for sure, as within this, with what's available with the suppliers, for sure. So I don't think that is certainly out of the line for us to kind of relook at whether we get a lighter color. I think also we don't want to be picking a very bright color, because that can also get in the way, or something that reflects too much. So I think we're certainly open to it.
Okay, no,
Wanted to see, sorry, Councillor, just wanted to see if Josh wanted to intervene too. I saw that he had raised his hand.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention the fence, which Roberto talked about. So, in consultations with the neighbor, we did understand the request for a board fence. So the majority of this wall is covered by that board fence in their sight lines. I just wanted to make sure we emphasize that, Councillor.
Right. So yeah, Josh, so the fence goes up 7 feet, and
correct.
Yeah, so there's a few feet gap, I guess. Do you know what the difference is between the fence and the top of the garage wall?
Yeah, we can, a rough guess.
I'll tell you the reason I'm asking. I think that, just another suggestion for softening it was, planter boxes with vines or something coming, spilling over.
Right, which is all being provided.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just sensitive, obviously. And I know that you met with the neighbors to the north also, but just sensitive to sort of their what they're looking at in their.
Right. So yeah, it's about 1.8 meters different from the top of the fence to the roof edge. And then, but what we also did include was a series of planters that would be lined up against that roof line, so that planting could be up there as well. There's no terrace, no tenant would have access to a terrace. The planters would be maintained by the building staff, but that is part of the plan.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. No further questions for the applicant.
Thank you. And I see also that Vice Chair Quinn has raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just about the setbacks. It's a little hard to tell from the renderings that have been presented. I'm just wondering how much further the podium projects into the sidewalk as compared to the Queen Anne houses to the west.
You're talking about the 4-story podium against the front.
Yeah, on Somerset Street.
On Somerset Street. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the site plan now. So right now, our podium is, for the most part, I would say about 3.5 meters from the property line. And then there's a small part where you can see a bay window like a commercial bay window that is about 2.6 meters from the property line. And really, we're being subject to the hydro is really what's really forcing us there. Like normally traditional Main Street really wants you to be as close as you can to your property line. But in this case, Hydro really pushed us back. And so
I'm just thinking with respect to the
Right.
heritage property, the neighboring
So,
heritage
yeah,
properties.
it's less than a meter. It's 0.7 meters to the, I guess the neighbor, which would be the Union 613 building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions for you. So thank you for the detailed presentation for the applicant and the team. The next registered speaker is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. And we're just waiting for David to come back on.
You'll need to accept the prompt to be promoted to panelist chair. Should be coming online now.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No
I didn't
problem.
see the prompt.
Please go ahead, David.
Thank you. Heritage Ottawa does not support this application. The evolution of the proposal, rather than improving the development, appears to have made it worse. Despite the initial concerns expressed by the community and the UDRP about the massing, height, and face of the building, and yes, we have to remember that it is one building, the proposal does not appear to have effectively mitigated these concerns and those applying to the Heritage Conservation District. Both the 4-story podium and the 14-story tower above are totally out of scale with the existing neighborhood. Rather than respect and be sensitive to the cultural heritage value of the Centertown Heritage Conservation District, the proposal is not evocative of the small-scale residential type buildings to the west, south, and north of the proposed development. It also does not appear to be consistent with the intent of the Centertown Heritage Conservation District Plan and the Centertown Community Design Plan, both of which call for measures to protect and preserve Centertown's heritage assets, including heritage streetscapes, of which Somerset Village is a notable example. We therefore recommend that the Built Heritage Subcommittee do not support the staff recommendations for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your comments. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your deputation. And our next registered speaker is Jack Hanna of the Centertown Community Association.
Eric, if you lose me from the Zoom call, I'm also dialed in by phone. So if you unmute the phone, I'll be able to go. I'm here on behalf of town. Can you?
Your connection, Jack, is definitely spotty on the call. So
do you want me to do it by phone? Do you want me to do it by phone? I can do that as well.
It seems to have cleared up, so maybe let's just see if we can go ahead with this connection. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. The Urban Design Review Panel opposed a tower at this site in the strongest language I've ever heard the UDRP use. I'll quote directly from the verbal remarks the chair of the UDRP made in summarizing. He said, and I'm quoting, "We always thought this is a mid-rise site. Let us be very clear. We don't believe this is a tower site. It is overwhelming. It is far too much density." The UDRP understands that a traditional main street, and Somerset is a traditional main street, is not a place for a high-rise. So given the UDRP opposed a tower at this site, what did the developer do? They revised the design and came back with a taller tower. I'll repeat that. The UDRP said no tower. The developer came back with a taller tower. This tower contradicts every relevant planning document, but that's obvious. The zoning in every planning document says Somerset is a traditional main street, and that's important. It should not be casually tossed aside. The UDRP in its report did address the possibility that City Council would ignore the UDRP's advice. It did say, if you're going to allow a tower, there are things you can do to make a tower more palatable. But the city and the developer have agreed to do some of those things. But let's be clear, the UDRP fundamentally opposed a tower at this site. One UDRP architect was clear what it would mean for the future. She said, and again, quote, "This sets a precedent for all other projects." She was referring to establishment of a precedent allowing high rises on a traditional main street. When Ashley spoke earlier, she pointed to the tall buildings to the north of this site, which are not as tall as what is proposed here, but she pointed those buildings nearby as part of a rationale for allowing this high rise. If you allow a big, tall tower on Somerset, then in future, city staff and developers will point to it to rationalize more high rises on a traditional main street. The Centertown Community Association urges you to honor Somerset as a traditional main street. Do not put a tower there. Do not set a precedent for a street that has a delightful character and should not become a canyon of high rises. Honor the heritage character of Somerset Village and Somerset as a traditional main street. The tower is too high. And as the gentleman from Heritage Ottawa said, so is the podium. 4 stories is too much. 18 stories now is far too much. Thank you.
Thank you. And there are some questions for you. One from your ward councillor, Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jack. Jack, I just want to delve into something around the height. As you know, we're dealing with heritage today, so a vote today can be very different than a vote at planning, vote at council. Heritage is that one area where we really do look at applications strictly from a heritage perspective. And I wonder how we would rationalize it. There is a portion of this property that is zoned for height. It's set back from the main street, and so you could actually have a tall, thin tower, or you could have a tall tower that's even narrower than what we have today. If that were being contemplated today, would there still be, do you think, would there still be an argument against the application that we're seeing in front of us from a heritage perspective? If the I think it's 16 stories now, this is 18, but if the tower portion were simply on that portion of the property that allowed for it, do you feel that everything else in front of us would be within the rules of the Conservation Heritage District and the Centertown Heritage policy?
I'm not a heritage expert, but I point out to you that the tall tower is allowed on the back quarter of this property. The tower now occupies 80% of the property. The tower would be much farther away from Somerset if it was on the portion of the property that is zoned for 27 stories. Right now, it's about half the length of an OC Transpo bus back from the Facade on Somerset. If you had the tower only on the portion of the property currently zoned for 27 stories, it would be several OC Transpo buses away from Somerset. Does that answer the question?
Partially, but, and I can respect that. Yeah, you're not a heritage expert, so I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that, but it does. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I saw that Councillor Gower had raised his hand. Just wanted to know if he still wanted to ask a question.
Oh, I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay. Well, then thank you, Jack, for your deputation. And the next registered speaker is Sylvie Faulkner. And you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, so thank you. And you have an important decision before you. I represent a condo at 364 Cooper Street. I'm one of the board members, and we feel, our residents feels that this is an unacceptable precedent. It's a traditional street, and there are no tall buildings. As you could see from the slides presented by the city and the developer, everything is low rise or not tall so in the surrounding streets. And this is these are traditional streets, and they're not meant for skyscrapers. This will be, I know the developer is putting the emphasis on the podium, but it doesn't detract from the fact that they want to build an 18-story building. So I would hope, I mean, that the members of this committee will take that into consideration, and as well, we support the comments from Heritage Ottawa and the Centretown Community Association. So thank you.
We appreciate your comments, Sylvie. Are there any questions? I see none, but of course, it's important to reiterate that the properties designated under Part 5 of the Act, for us, the question is whether the proposed alteration or new construction is appropriate in the Heritage Conservation District and whether the application meets the relevant guidelines and policies. Obviously, questions regarding height and density, as I had noted before, are set, and as Councillor McKinney had noted before, are set through zoning bylaw and are more the province of the planning committee than the Built Heritage Subcommittee. So just wanted to reiterate that fact. But thank you for your comments. They're much appreciated. And we do have one more registered speaker on the list, Mark Vaness. And we're just waiting for Mark to join. Thank you. So we see you, Mark, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning. Listen, for the members of this committee, I live at 354 Cooper, so I'm on the north side. And Councillor McKinney did allude to some of the materials used on the northern side. And again, there's two properties. There's 354 and 356. I'm representing both homes here, the other owners being away on vacation. And like I say, they're residential homes. We have worked with the developer, and that we're happy that they're internalizing the garage with respect to noise and pollution and so forth. So we are happy with that. I want the members to recognize that there is no setback, however, on the northern side. Well, there's a 0.31, I think, meter setback. That allows for what Roberto mentioned, the architect, a structure that actually bolts well onto the structure. If not, they wouldn't have the space to, I guess, maybe brick or create something like that, like a brick facade. But what we're concerned about, we're not hiding about the mass and the height and all this. These were concerns that we've had since day one. But we are happy about the garage. Now, with respect to the structure as it is proposed right now, we just want to make sure that the black cladding on the northern side and the western side is actually really softened. We talk about vines and so forth. How is that really going to materialize in softening those heritage homes? There's Heritage 1 and Heritage 2 homes. So we want to make sure that the developer group actually really attempts to soften that. And again, you may not know, but the foundation of the Heritage 1 house on the northern side is actually 10 feet roughly, or 3 meters from that garage structure. So again, they're very close to the property line. We're for intensification. We understand. We're not in my backyard type of people, even though it is actually in the backyard. So it's only 10 feet away. But again, there I'm imploring the developer group to make sure that that is somewhat softened. I know there's a 2.1 meter fence that is shown on the design, which is the maximum height. There's a lot of variances that have been accepted here for the developer. Why wouldn't that fence, a wooden fence, be brought up to the height of the roughly 13-foot garage height? I think that there's exceptions in this process. We should probably have an exception with respect to, getting that material out of our sight line. We have brick and wood, these properties. And if there's brick and wood, then we're kind of like, okay, despite the lack of setback. So again, this is no surprise to the developer group. I think they've seen my face too often on this. We're coming down to the finish line, subject to comments that you received today with respect to whether or not this structure itself fits on this property. And one last comment to this group here, just for sake of transparency. I know Jack Hanna mentioned 27th floor. I think the zoning is for potentially 16th floor maximum, which is that little R5 sliver, which is the park that you've seen on the parking lot and the park section. That was an old heritage house. So there is a little sliver of R5, 16th floor. And I do think that the R5, if we look at the history of how that was given, it was actually for the third condominium development that was supposed to be done on Cooper, which would have included 356 Cooper, my property 354, the corner unit, which is 226 Cooper, O'Connor rather, and that little park, that's the heritage house that was demolished. I think that triangle was there to actually build a 16. And I do appreciate the TM component, which was a smaller height that was supposed to be there. But I leave that to the city of Ottawa and the planners to decide what's the appropriate, height and structure to be put on that property. And one last comment, maybe if somebody could answer that. Jack Hanna mentioned the UDRP that had strong resistance to this project. Why isn't the city listening to that, or is that just a consultation that they give and they either accept it or disregard it? I was always a little bit confused on that. Maybe this goes beyond this call. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you with those thoughts.
Thank you, Mark, for your comments to the committee. You do have a question from your ward councillor, Councillor McKinney.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mark. You ended that with 2 seconds to go. I don't know if you timed your comments, but
I just winging it.
Perfect. Well done. We've gone back and forth a lot on this. We've worked with the developer on your concerns. And I think in the end, Mark, if I can kind of summarize right today, that black cladding that on the north side, north and west really, but the north side that directly faces your backyard, that is part of that garage wall. And I know, again, some of my colleagues won't know this, but there was at one point a proposal to have a driveway there. That's not something that you felt would be amenable to your enjoyment as a property owner in your backyard. But with the garage, if I can just ensure that I understand correctly, because there is a process for working through some minor design changes that will be delegated to the general manager going forward, so that black cladding, whether it's a lighter material or the city allowing the fence to go above the height limit, or vines kind of pouring over. But what you were looking for is a real softening of that wall that's very close to your property on that garage wall. You do not necessarily have an issue with the step back from that garage. I think that your view from your yard, the angle view, has been improved. Do I have that correct?
Yes. Said another way, it's actually a concession on our part to say, look, we're not going to oppose the no setback from the northern property, which is a rear yard setback, which actually should be 7.5 meters, and then landscaping of 3 meters, all this stuff. And we had talked to the developer group where maybe the internalization of a garage at the height of my fence, which the fence is about 3 meters, is something that we would appreciate. And I think it's something that would have benefited the developer and 354 and 356 Cooper, in the sense of, if it was an open face access, no garage, there's a lot of individuals using that park for drugs. You know, I won't get too graphical here, but it's a public washroom, graffitis, and all these things. So we said that, geez, we could get a benefit of having an enclosed garage where you'd have less of this people congregating there, of course, so we win there. But at the same time, I think as a developer, you don't want to have sketchy individuals kind of living beside your property. So it was a concession, Catherine. And you mentioned the black cladding. I'm also representing 256 Cooper. So when you look at it from that side of that property, the west side, the black cladding gets a little bit more predominant because there's a different height. There's a height of 13 feet, which is the garage. But then when you look at it from the west, it actually goes up to about 16 feet, give or take. I'm just eyeballing this. And then when you look at it along the side of Union Restaurant that Roberta was mentioning, oh, you have brick, right? And you also have landscaping between a tight squeeze between Union and that brick podium. But there's actually doesn't appear to be any landscaping for the residential property at 356 Cooper, which is my neighbor. So I think it's actually looking at that. And again, we're just about finished a marathon here. It just needs to have some sensitivity towards residential heritage single family homes on the north that has rarely been addressed by the heritage reports that were prepared for this project. It seems like the north is always not necessarily discussed. I'm putting this mildly.
Okay. Listen, thanks, Mark, to both you and Lena. I know that you've put in a lot of effort on this, so I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the confirmation on what my understanding was. So thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions for you, Mark. So thank you for your deputation this morning. Much appreciated. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I see that Barry raised his hand first.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. This is to Ashley, Heritage staff. In the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement and in the staff report, it is acknowledged that this 18-story building will have an impact on the character of the Heritage Conservation District, and yet the staff report recommends approval for it. I do appreciate the introduction of the 4-story brick podium. I think that is a very sensitive move to maintain the scale of the Somerset Street Village and bookend the east end, such as what we have on the west end. And I'm quite familiar with the Somerset Village in that in 1998, 331 Somerset burned to the ground, and we were the architects that faithfully reconstructed it to take its place in the heritage character of the street. So if you would be kind enough just to respond to the questions that have been raised about the UDRP strong recommendation against a high-rise building here, and the concern that has been expressed in the CHIS about the impact on the Heritage District. Could you please respond to why the staff report recommends approval? Thank you.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I might defer to my colleague Steve Gauthier for some of the UDRP question or answer there, but I'll certainly start off. Through the secondary plan, more height is contemplated through all of Centertown, and this is areas, as alluded to earlier, the back of the site, the north end of the site was permitted up to 16 stories. So given that height is already a density expected in this area and this property, staff have focused really on the transition using the guidelines in the CDP, which provide guidelines and recommendations of how to incorporate that height into the surrounding low-scale area of Centertown Heritage Conservation District. So we're really looking at that as our medium really for making that compatibility better from a tower to down to the low-scale area around the property. And as for UDRP, I don't know if Steve Gauthier is available here, but as Jack Hanna and I think Heritage Ottawa also mentioned, there was a comment about this not being a tower site, but if staff felt that a tower was appropriate, there should be certain mitigation measures implemented. Both myself and Steve in Development Review have worked with the applicant to try our best to make sure those were implemented and reducing the tower height, reducing the tower footprint, and also moving that 9-story massing that was shown up at Somerset Street.
Yes, thank you, Ashley.
So if you'd like development review staff to comment on the UDRP comments, when this proposal first attended UDRP, as mentioned by Mr. Hanna earlier, they had concern with this type of typology, a tower typology, but did it indicate that if development review staff would be supportive, that certain measures should be followed? So, but essentially, if I'm looking into the summary of the first comments, the first visit to UDRP, and it says here, and I'm quoting, the high-rise typology poses adjacency issues with the neighboring sites, and that's why, starting from that first visit, staff has asked for different. We've looked at different design iterations as Mr. Campos presented, and that's why we have asked for increased setback and step back, particularly on the front along Somerset and on the west side. Okay, so there's a in front a significant step back of 6.5 meters. And on the side, I do have here the height schedule. So the property will be at the front to 1.3, the 4-story podium would be 1.3 meter from the west property line. It gains a bit more distance as it goes towards the north. So at the north of the site, the setback will be 2 meters. But the step back of the tower is 3.5 meters. So in addition to the 1.3, you get a 3.5 meter step back for the tower. And as I said, I should mention the front setback, the closest that the podium gets to Somerset is 2.5 meters, plus another 6.5 on top of the podium to reach the tower. And the podium is all bricked around. It ties with the other 4-story building on the northeast of Somerset and Bank. So that's why we've used the comments from the UDRP to really push for measures at the podium level to ensure that this development is as sensitive as possible with its surrounding. And also, the tower itself has a very modest footprint of 590 meters. So this casts narrower shadows on the properties adjacent to this development. So I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Steve, for that, and Ashley for your further answer. I see that Councillor Gower has a question for staff.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question to Member Podolsky, but maybe on the UDRP, did they have, I haven't read the UDRP report on this, but did they have specific comments about this application as it relates to the heritage elements and the Heritage Conservation District? Can you just clarify how specific their comments were or were not to the heritage part of this?
Okay, well, I do see here again in the first visit, it says the required separation, distance, and relationship to heritage building do not support a tower. An important point here is that there's normally minimum distances between towers. In this case, because the depth of the properties north of this development would not provide sufficient developable area for a tower, there will not be a scenario with the two towers, one against the other. In terms of the relationship to the heritage buildings, well, there's the podium that we've discussed with the brick. There were discussions about putting brick for the garage enclosure, and there's also other measures that can be contemplated through site plan approval to soften that wall with a Virginia creeper, for example. But what's important to mention here is that with that podium and with that garage enclosure, the perspective down to the private amenity area, to the rear backyards of those properties to the north is obstructed, first by that enclosure, and second, on top of the 4-story podium, the tower was initially flush with the podium, but staff has asked for 1.5 meter step back also. So the 5th floor is step back 1.5 meter, which is sufficient to obstruct the perspective down into the backyard. So there's tangible measures on the north to protect the privacy of the private exterior amenity areas from those overlooking windows on the north side of this development.
And on a different tack, I guess, on the question of compatibility and as it relates to the Heritage Conservation District guidelines, I'm trying to get a sense from staff when you're evaluating a 4-story podium like this, how do you assess compatibility? I mean, next door to this, there are some 3-story Victorian homes, and behind it, kind of a similar. Across the street, there's a more modern building. Further west on Bank Street, there's maybe I think a 5 or 6-story building that's perhaps more similar to this one. How broadly do you look in compatibility? Are you looking at the immediate neighbors? Are you looking at the 3 or 4 blocks surrounding, or are you looking even more broadly into overall compatibility or similarity with other buildings in other parts of Centertown?
For this one, we were looking mainly at that same streetscape on Somerset, since Somerset Village is a quite iconic and intact streetscape. So as you mentioned, there are about mostly 3-story heights. Former houses rather than mainly converted to commercial space, with the other end of Bank Street, so the west end of that block being a 4-story building. So we were considering mainly that side of the street, the north side, for compatibility, knowing that also the south side of Somerset also has those Victorian houses. And I think a 3-story, there was, I think we showed in the presentation, myself and also the applicant's team showed a podium that was a 3-story volume, and heritage staff had felt that both a 3-story volume or a 4-story volume could have worked in this scenario.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Member Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. A question about the fenestration patterns and some of the other traditional details that have been incorporated into this development. Looking at the submission to UDRP, and again, staff's presentation today on how the design has evolved, it seems that previous iterations had incorporated more of the elements from those 3-story gable roof, sort of Victorian style houses along Somerset Village a little bit more. I'm thinking specifically there are arched 2-story windows that are reflective of those, albeit on a much larger scale. within the heritage homes, there is a sort of black-clad banded story that functions as a quasi-cornice. These and other elements seem to have been removed or downplayed in the latest iterations. So I was wondering if you'd comment on how some of these design changes have come forward and maybe what the rationale would be behind them.
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure if I'm actually the best person to answer that question, likely the architect. Those curved elements, as you alluded to, the arched windows, that was changed in the recent submission. I'm not entirely sure why they've made that design decision. I think we gave the direction just to simplify the design to increase compatibility and make it a little more subtle, but I'm not entirely sure as to the reason why the arched windows were fully removed.
Okay, well, I don't know, Chair, if I would be allowed to pose that to the project architect. Just of note, UDRP had at the time said they appreciated the analysis of the site and wanted to see more of an incorporation of those features. So seeing us backtracking a bit, it may be worth just hearing the rationale.
And I appreciate that. I think we can try to bring back the architect to the committee to answer that specific question. And I think Eric might be working on that right now.
Apologies, Chair. Just looking at the list of attendees, the architect might not be in attendance, but I can try emailing him if that's of interest to the committee.
Absolutely. In the meantime, however, we can just continue on with questions. And I see if Member Hassel doesn't have any additional questions apart from that one to the architect, we can move on with Councillor McKinney to ask further questions of staff.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go with Councillor McKinney.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
The architect is here.
Yeah, so I never left. I don't know why I couldn't get on. No, I've been here the whole time. So yeah, like I think when we went from the 2-story podium to the 3-story podium, you know, when we went to from the 3 to the 4, I think through consultation with our own heritage consultant, we kind of looked at ways of softening the language. I think the proportions kind of looked a little bit awkward in our mind. We did actually look at it with the arched windows at the 4-story kind of design, but that extra floor really kind of, you know, things, you know, when you start looking at it as an architect, you start testing it and looking at it, and it just, some things just didn't seem right. And so we worked actually with Jon and to kind of look at the facades and really looking at the step backs of the podium, of the balconies, as well as the window treatment, and basically looked at it as finding a way to simplify the design, and that's really where it came from.
Okay, and just to refresh my memory from the presentation, it seems like the current fenestration pattern draws from the other anchor building at, I think, 277 Bank Street. Is that correct?
The one at Bank Street? No. I think as you look at the sketch, the idea is the push and pulls, the volumes, the solids, the voids are really taking their cues from the Victorian homes down the street. I think the datum lines, the location of the 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor are picking up their datum lines from also the Victorian homes. And then the idea of the 4th story was looking at this as an anchor bookend for the site. I think that's really where that building kind of provided some influence in this, and being able to provide a 4-story kind of edge to that, to either Bank Street and O'Connor. But the fenestrations were really a combination of, like I said, the volumetrics of what's happening with the street, but also reality that this is a residential building. Like, you know, one thing where once we start laying out plans, we have to start laying out bedrooms, kitchens, living rooms that are, you know, also telling us from the building code how much minimum glazing we need to provide. I think what we tried to do is then look at those, and not as a curtain wall expression, but certainly at a punched window expression. And then on top of that, actually providing some additional, what we're calling like a black trim or a detail around the windows to help accentuate in a contemporary way what's happening in a more traditional way down the street.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. I think I think the arched windows and that sort of quasi cornice that was sort of indicated through that fourth story really did hearken to the traditional streetscape of Centertown and Somerset a little bit more closely. But I appreciate the design or the explanation behind the design changes.
Thank you, Member Hassel. And now we can go back to Councillor McKinney.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the comments, the earlier comments around the black cladding and just the color schemes of the tower, I wonder if I could provide a direction through site plan as part of the site plan control through the delegated authority for the minor design changes for staff to explore a lighter color for the tower and explore a softer tones or a softer finish, where the black cladding is being proposed on the north and south side. Just if they could explore some changes to that, and maybe further that with some landscaping. I really am sensitive to that black cladding and the dark tower. I just think that from the perspective of the residents to the north, it would go a long way in making the what we have in front of us more conducive to what they should be able to expect from a heritage conservation district perspective from their property.
Through you, Chair, staff can take that back and look at that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I also appreciate that direction as well. Does any other committee member have any other questions for staff? Seeing none, do any of the members have comments on this item? And I see no hand. Member Hassel.
Sorry, Chair, snuck in at the end there. I just wanted to express that I really do understand and appreciate the amount of time and revision and patience and effort from community members, from neighbors, from the proponent and their consulting team, and from the city to refine this proposal and to get it to somewhere we want to be. I'd strongly support Councillor McKinney's recommendations for the tower and for the treatment on that, and I hope we can find a way to soften it a little more. Looking at the zoning on this site, it looks like 3/4 of the lot is zoned traditional Main Street, and it's just that northernmost parcel that brings it back to the R5. City staff are supportive of having the tower at this location, but given that the balance is, again, traditional Main Street, having compatibility with these features and elements is important. In a sense, it helps define what the future vision would be for Somerset more broadly. Traditional Main Street carries down the road quite a bit. It's not just on Somerset Village here as defined between O'Connor and Bank. And we are very lucky that in this particular spot, we have so many residents that use the space and know it and love it and have come out to offer their opinions. So I hope we are able to get it through past the finish line and refine those final elements.
Appreciate your comments. And I also see that Vice Chair Quinn has her hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. I too would like to congratulate everybody that's been working very hard on the various iterations that have come, well, not before us, but that have been developed in the process of getting to this point. And I think the most recent version of the podium from the Somerset side is a vast improvement. But overall, my comments, I would also like to to say that to staff and to certain of my elected colleagues today that considering height and the impact of height on the integrity and quality of a heritage conservation district is indeed extremely valuable and an important consideration. And to have heard an attempt for us not to address that issue today because it's a planning issue is a little concerning for me personally. So I do indeed think that the impact of a tower in this area of the Heritage Conservation District of Centertown, the fact that it is along a traditional main street, a particularly special one, I think, in terms of its public use, the Somerset Village, the uniqueness of those of that block in particular, a couple of blocks in particular. I think that this tower at 18 stories is too high, and I am not going to be supporting the recommendation today. But I do appreciate the work that has gone into it, and I just think it needs to be less dense, less height, in order to better reflect the values of this heritage conservation district. And this is from a heritage perspective that I am addressing the height issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. Any other comments from members? Seeing none, I think it is important to note that the planning context has changed since the Heritage Conservation District was designated in 1997, when heights for new buildings were capped at 4 stories, and the Heritage Conservation District guidelines did not contemplate high rises. A Centertown Heritage Study that is nearing completion will soon propose a new Heritage Conservation District plan for adoption that will bring current guidelines up to date with the current planning context. Because the current secondary plan does contemplate high rises, Heritage staff, as we heard, focused on the review of the podium to ensure its compatibility with the existing streetscape character. The podium design is compatible because it uses red brick, punch windows in similar volumes with articulation inspired by the Somerset streetscape. The tower would be set back 8 meters from Somerset Street, allowing the podium's massing to echo the heights along the north side of Somerset Street and to serve as a bookend to the 3- and 4-story volumes at the corner of Somerset and Bank Street. It is also important to note that the situation at this location is unique in that it is an amalgamation of 3 vacant lots that do not contain any heritage buildings, and the new building would reestablish a continuous streetscape along Somerset and O'Connor Street. I do appreciate the challenges with height, but we do know that we deal at this subcommittee with Part 4 and Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And I think that I would agree with others that there is room for discussion about height, but I would submit to you that that does belong in a different venue in planning committee. So as a consequence, I do maintain some of the concerns that we heard from community members, but with what's before us, and as a consequence of this unique situation, I'll be supporting the report. And I know that Vice Chair Quinn has dissented. Is the report carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried with dissent from Vice Chair Quinn. This report will be submitted to Planning Committee on May 26, 2022. Our next item is an application to demolish 197 and 201 Wilbrod Street, properties designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of the Sandy Hill West Heritage Conservation District. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Hello, everyone again. Just changing directions a little bit. I'll just wait for the slides to come up. All right. So as mentioned, this is an application for demolition for 2 properties on Wilbrod Street, numbers 197 and 201, both designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. The 2 front gable houses are located on the east side of the Sandy Hill West Hares Conservation District, just a few houses in from King Edward Avenue, the HCD's eastern boundary. Next slide. The properties were constructed around 1876 as a cluster of 3 2.5-story front gable brick houses. Numbers 197 and 201 have been heavily altered over the years, with stucco applied to their front facades, iron porches replacing the original wooden ones, and the removal of the barge board. A garage has been erected between the 2 houses. Note that the bracing on the west side of 197, that's the house on the left if you're looking at the images, this was installed in the past few years as the wall was cracked and buckling. Next slide. As far as timeline goes, these properties were constructed around 1876 and designated under Part 5 of the Act in 1994. In 2003, the former owner applied to demolish the properties under the demolition control provisions of the Planning Act. This application was refused by council in 2005 as there was no accompanying heritage application. These properties were added to the heritage watch list in 2016 and received regular monitoring for compliance to the property standards bylaw. Over the past 10 years, several orders under the Building Code Act were issued and work was undertaken to brace and secure the buildings. Next slide. Over the course of the last 15 years or more, these buildings have sat vacant and have been the subject of neglect and vandalism. The properties have been braced and fenced and monitored by staff and building code services for several years. Engineering reports by Ultravic Engineering, as well as Art Engineering, state that both the buildings are in very poor condition, concluding that nearly all the elements would need to be replaced due to their condition, and it would be best to demolish the existing structures. After many years of working with the previous owner to encourage rehabilitation of these buildings, it became clear that meaningful retention and rehabilitation was no longer possible. Given the safety and bylaw issues with these properties and feedback from the local community, staff have reluctantly encouraged the owner to apply for demolition permit under the Ontario Heritage Act, provided a replacement building is proposed. This is the application that is before us today is the demolition. The new proposed building will be 4 stories, clad in red brick, and drawn design elements found on low-rise apartment buildings in the streetscape and in the HCD. The construction for the application for the new construction will be before the BHSC in the coming months. Next slide. As far as consultation goes, Heritage Ottawa and Action Sandy Hill were notified of the application for demolition, as was the ward councillor and neighbors within 30 meters. Next slide. The staff recommend to approve the demolition of the subject properties, subject to the following conditions: that essentially the property is maintained clean, landscaped, and not used for any other purposes until the application comes forward and new construction, until new construction commences. And lastly, also to issue a heritage permit for the demolition of the 2 properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, for that report. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa, which is in support of this application. And we do have 2 registered speakers, David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. And thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Heritage Ottawa agrees with the engineering studies which show that these 2 buildings are beyond being effectively repaired, and we therefore reluctantly support the recommendation for demolition. The deterioration of these buildings has been developing for the past 20 years, owing to the lack of repairs by the previous owners, and for much of the time, the ineffectiveness of the city in requiring the repairs necessary to preserve them. The latter has changed for the better with the adoption of the city's heritage watch list and the closer collaboration between the city's heritage, bylaw, and building code enforcement staff. Unfortunately for these properties, this came too late. In June 2005, I recall making a Heritage Ottawa submission to LACAC the precursor of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, opposing the request for a demolition permit for these two buildings without an approved development proposal. 17 years later, we support the demolition request, knowing that the current owner has developed a plan for a new building that will attempt to address the heritage and planning requirements of the Sandy Hill West Heritage Conservation District. The current owner has been meeting with city staff and community representatives, including Heritage Ottawa, since 2019 in an attempt to develop a design for a new building that seeks to meet the community concerns regarding and the city zoning bylaw and development policies. We therefore urge you to support the staff recommendations for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that deputation. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your comments this morning. And our next speaker is Jon Stewart. And I've see that you've joined, Jon, so you have 5 minutes if you want to make comment. And I think that Jon disappeared.
The speaker might need to unmute, Chair.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay, perfect. There we go.
I had this flashing sign saying unmute, unmute, and I was ignoring it. Sorry about that. I just wanted to add my support to the comments from Mr. Fleming and Ashley in terms of the demolition of these 2 buildings. It's been a sort of a these 2 buildings have ended up being orphans in a conservation district, and it's been unfortunate to sort of watch these buildings as they deteriorate. The 3 buildings were identical. They were quite an interesting part of the streetscape, and at this point, they've reached a stage where the preservation is not possible. I think on the positive side is that the plan being put forward and has been developed is very sensitive. It's well thought out, and the replacement apartment building will in fact support the intent of the conservation district and will address the quality of the rest of the buildings on the street and the quality of the streetscape. So in that light, I support the demolition part of the conservation of the CHIS. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Any questions for Jon? Seeing none, thank you for your, oh, there is a question from Vice Chair Quinn. Sorry about that.
Sorry, yeah, I was a little late getting to my hand. It's really just a question of what the calendar looking forward. Just, you know, I don't know, Jon, if you can answer this, but in terms of the planning, when the development is anticipated, and in the meantime, after the buildings are demolished and before that is undertaken, what's the strategy for the site, for the lot, from the perspective of the neighborhood? Is there going to be some bit of landscaping, or what's happening there?
I believe that the plan is for the demolition to move forward once it's approved, and that there is a temporary landscape cleanup and management of the site in the interim until the actual construction goes forward.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you. I don't think that there are any other questions for Jon, so Thank you so much for your intervention on this item. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I don't see any hands raised, but I do know that the ward councillor is with us. I don't know if Councillor Fleury wanted to provide any input, is available to do so. If he is not, I know that he had noted to me that he is supportive of this item. So do any of the members have any comments on this item specifically? Seeing no comments, I just really would echo what Heritage Ottawa said. Engineering studies show that these two buildings are unfortunately beyond being effectively repaired and therefore require demolition. I think that the good news is that we know that city staff is looking at mechanisms around vacant properties. So I think we're going to hear a little bit more from city staff on that soon, so that we would hopefully not see these situations occur in the future as often as they do. The other element here is we know that this property will be subjected to an application for new construction at a future meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. So is this report carried?
Carried.
So this report is scheduled to be presented to Council on May 25th. And our next item involves an application to alter 126 York Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act and located in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Yes, good morning, Chair, and good morning, committee members. I'll just wait till the slides are up. I think they are now. So the application in front of you today is to alter 126 York Street. Next slide. The property is a through lot with frontage on both York and George Street. The portion of the property with the historic building is located in the Byward Market HCD. Next slide. Here's an aerial view for some context. You can see the southern portion of the property is a parking lot and the northern portion has the historic structure. Next slide. It is a 5-story building with brick and precast stone cladding. The front facade has some wonderful architectural detailing, including the parapet with a curved middle cornice, large industrial windows, and a decorative stone front entrance. Next slide. These are the side and rear facades of the building, which feature an exposed concrete grid. The design of these sides of the building is more industrial and functional in its use. You can see there a 3-story addition that was constructed between 1928 and 1958 that does not contribute to the cultural heritage value of this building. Next. These are some historic photos of the structure. It was constructed in 1913 as a wholesale grocery warehouse for the Major family, a prominent Francophone family in early 20th century Ottawa. It was designed as an industrial interpretation in the Beaux-Arts style by C.P. Meredith, a well-known Ottawa architect. Up next, you'll see what's being proposed. The alterations are to demolish the addition that we just looked at, construct a 1-story addition, and construct a new 22-story building to be integrated with the historic structure. Next slide. These are the elevations, the York and George Street elevations. Overall, this is an adaptive reuse project that will rehabilitate and convert the historic building into a hotel, and the connected high-rise will be an apartment building with rental units. The small 1-story recessed addition will feature a restaurant. There are 2 levels of underground parking being proposed. This application will also require a zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide. These are the east and west elevations. You can see the high-rise addition will be set back about 9 meters from the existing heritage building, and the height of the new building steps away from the historic structure in landscape terraces up to the George Street frontage. The cladding on the new building features large expanses of glazing and light gray precast concrete panels in both a smooth and textured finish. Next slide. These are just some streetscape renderings showing the views of the building looking east and west along York Street. Next slide. There's two primary alterations to the historic building. The first is to remove and replace in kind the brick infill walls on the east, west, and south elevation. The brick has been assessed as being in poor condition with deterioration, spalling, and staining noted throughout. The new bricks will match in color, mortar, and bond pattern, and the concrete grid will be conserved and repaired where necessary, and a fiberglass reinforced concrete panel will be applied on top. Next slide. The next alteration is to the windows, which are primarily metal, multi-paned, and industrial style. The windows on the front facade and the first bays on the side elevations will be replaced in kind, and the concrete sills will be retained and restored where possible and replicated where necessary. Next. The window pattern on the east and west facade will be reconfigured. You can see here the white outline is the existing location of the windows, and the darker windows is what is being proposed. The new pattern is complementary to the original character and maintains the industrial feel of the building. And the windows will be replaced in kind here as well with metal windows. There's significant restoration that's being proposed as part of this development. Notably on the front facade, including, I'll just highlight a couple of the elements: retention and restoration of terracotta inserts and brick paneling, cleaning, repointing, and repair of masonry, including the stone and brick, preservation of the metal cornices and trims, reconstruction of the original wooden entrance door based on photographic evidence, restoration of the front entrance, including the stone lions and the name panel of the building. And then finally, on the east elevation, once the existing addition is removed, the original concrete grid pattern and brick infill will be replicated. I will also note that the applicant intends on applying for a grant under the Heritage Community Improvement Program. Next slide. So overall, staff reviewed the proposal and determined it meets the guidelines for the Byward Market HCD and the standard and guidelines because it conserves the historic value of both this significant historic building and the Byward Market HCD. Next slide. Just some renderings. So it meets the applicable heritage policies and is a successful project because it has a use for the historic building that requires minimal intervention. It retains and restores this historic building in its entirety and keeps it as a focal point to the development. The height of the new building is set back from the front facade to maintain the streetscape character of York Street. And the height transitions away from the historic building and away from the core of the HCD. Finally, the new building uses compatible materials and articulations at the lower levels and then lighter materials on the upper stories. And the last slide is just a summary of the recommendations. Staff are recommending approval of the application with several conditions, including the submission of a letter of credit, the implementation of a conservation plan, submission of structural monitoring reports, and submission of material samples. Also recommending delegating authority for minor design changes and issuing the heritage permit with a 3-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that detailed presentation. The subcommittee did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa in support, and we do have a number of registered speakers, primarily from the applicant team. And I know that the applicant team has requested a presentation combining their time to 10 minutes. And so I'll invite both Carl Bray and Brian Burrows to give that presentation. There's also another number of members of the applicant team who will be able to provide some expertise if there are any other questions as well. So I'll invite the applicant team to give their presentation.
Thank you. I'm Carl Bray. I'm here with Brian Burrows. If we could start the slides, please. Just while that's happening, I want to compliment Anne on her presentation. She's covered a lot of the more detailed aspects of policy and compatibility with various aspects of the Heritage Conservation District's plan and some of the other contextual issues. But I will be covering a little bit of that and also some of the more detailed history of the site and how it fits within the context of the new development.
Chair, if I could ask an indulgence from the committee for a moment, just to pull up the slides.
Sure.
Just one thing I will say in advance, this project has evolved considerably over the process when it first began. And it really involved an understanding of the warehouse as a landmark, but also as a unique industrial building in an otherwise mixed use, primarily residential neighborhood adjacent to the main market area. Great, thank you very much. So next slide, please. As you can see, I realize the text is a little small here, but this was a result of ongoing consultation with between the client, with the consulting team, local residents association, the local councillor, and it really tried to understand the Heritage Conservation District plan, keeping in mind that only the warehouse is part of the Part 5 designation. It's a long site that goes all the way from York Street south to George Street, and basically 2/3 of the site are outside of the Heritage Conservation District. And really that's where most of the new addition is placed, outside of the HCD. The intent of the heritage approach was to make it conform not just to the standards and guidelines, as Anna's pointed out, but also to the notional policies and the guidelines of the HCD plan. And the initial idea for the presentation, for the proposal rather, was to conserve a portion of the warehouse over the evolution of the design. Now the entire warehouse is being conserved. Next slide, please. And it's an important property, as mentioned. It was first built in the early 20th century in 1913. Very prominent local architect, a member of the local committee working on City Beautiful ideas. The architect was really in his prime when he designed this building. And it's an interesting building because it's got a very public face on York Street and very modest and utilitarian sides and back. As you can see in this fire insurance plan from 1956, it is somewhat of an anomaly in a primarily residential district. And really the proposal is to reinstate that residential character in the context of conserving this building. And the little clip in the bottom is a long history of the Major family. Quite fascinating. They went forth and multiplied. They did all kinds of interesting things in the Ottawa area and certainly in Lower Town. And the widow of the founder became one of the most prominent businesswomen in Canada at the time. She essentially created National Grocers and was really a leader in business in the Ottawa area and even nationally. Next, please. And here we have the building. Anne has shown you some indicative photographs of it. It has really the elements of kind of a Beaux-Arts idea with the base, middle, and top, but this kind of eyebrow effect of the metal cornices over the top windows. Interesting little insert details of terracotta and stone. And then these wonderful industrial windows that create a really interesting detailed pattern within an otherwise fairly uniform facade. And then you've got this checkerboard grid on the sides and back where it's expressing the construction of the building. And then you just have very simple brick infill and windows within that. Next, please. So this is what you see on the other sides. Certainly the building has been altered, particularly on the east side. You can see it in the right-hand slide. And things have happened to the top. You have this kind of creeping ventilation equipment looming over the top and the back. You've got some changes to the fenestration pattern. A variety of different things have happened, but by and large, it's in very good condition. And not much in the way of egregious changes have occurred over the years. Next, please. As you can see from the original building, it had loading doors really on three sides. The main entrance, of course, was for pedestrians. but otherwise you had truck access all the way around. And the addition on the side initially started out as a garage, then became additional storage space for the grocery warehouse. And then you got this brick addition you see in the top right that had office space and further storage. So there's been an accumulation of additions on the east side over the years. And you can see a little bit of one of them in the bottom right-hand corner sticking out the back. You've also had additions plopped on the back where there would have been an additional elevator shaft. And then, as I say, those ventilation elements coming over the top. Next, please. And it is definitely part of the Byward Market District. This view looks back along York Street towards the market. Even though it's not in the market proper, it's very close to it, and certainly was an adjunct functionally to what happened in the market because it was a grocery warehouse. Next, please. So I mentioned some of the details. You can see some of them here. Rather marvelous entrance surround with these lions' heads and an incised lettering. You see on the top right some of the brickwork, but also the stonework, the use of blonde stone, the stone inserts, a number of things that enliven an otherwise very utilitarian building. And on the inside, you've got this very strongly expressed structural grid with the precast columns on standard centers, concrete floors, concrete ceilings. So it's a very robust building and very easily converted to other uses. And as you've heard, the proposed conversion is for a hotel. Next, please. Certainly there were issues. This building's over 100 years old. It's been exposed to the elements, needless to say. And there were issues, particularly at the joints with the concrete in the structural grid and with the brick infill. So you've got a situation here where with the structural grid, some of the exterior concrete has spalled off and you're exposing the structural rebar. With the brick, in some cases, the mortar is starting to deteriorate or bricks have been replaced. So it's showing us age on the sides. The windows, likewise, the windows are interesting because they are metal industrial windows with hopper units, but they're integral with the structure. So they can't be easily removed because they're stuck into the wall. And as you can see in the bottom right, they too have been modified over the years. Some units completely replaced, some of them tinkered with. So they're single glazed. You've got metal that's starting to deteriorate. There are a number of issues with the existing windows. So the intent is with the masonry to, as Anne mentioned, to clad the structural grid with panels that will stop the deterioration, but also continue the appearance of the structural grid and provide insulation. And then in terms of the brick, to replace the brick that's deteriorated with brick of a similar type and color, but providing a fully insulated wall section that isn't present at the moment. And then with the windows, essentially replicate using metal windows, but with fixed hopper units. Again, windows meet current building code, fully insulated and within a fully insulated wall section. Next, please. And these are just some window details you saw in some of Anne's previous slides showing what the new windows will be like. Next, please. And then as you saw some of the elevations, really the conservation approach, as Anne mentioned, is to take off the non-contributing additions, focus on the main warehouse. And I think it's important to note that where the wings have been put on the east elevation, which is what you see in the top right, that facade essentially will be restored with a slightly different fenestration pattern. So you're getting back the overall appearance with some slight modifications of the original warehouse. And that appearance has really been hidden for much of the warehouse's more recent life. And then likewise on the sides and top, taking off some of those ventilation elements and again, providing a uniform elevation here and on the east side. Next, please. And this is just a indication of the rear, where the rear elevation will mostly be covered by the new construction, but we'll be continuing the same grid pattern, use of brick, and coloration as on the other elevations. Next, please. So in its urban context, this slide shows some of the existing and proposed buildings that are indicated in the immediate area. So what you get is the warehouse still giving you the massing and appearance of the streetscape along that part of York Street, but then the bulk of the new addition is stepped back and is situated mostly to the rear on George Street. And certainly the new addition will overlap the roof of the existing warehouse. It'll be set back initially and then stepped back from there. But when viewed from the pedestrian level, your primary view will still be of the landmark facade and side elevations. You're also getting a through block connection that will allow pedestrian access along the side and give, again, better visual access to the sides of the warehouse. Likewise, with the small restaurant on the other side, you'll get a good view of that side. Next, please. And these are just the elevations that you've seen previously. Next, please. And this is the east side, which would showing the restored east elevation. Next, please. So in terms of impact, it conserves the heritage attributes that have been identified both by the city and in my CHIS. It remains a landmark and visually prominent within the HCD. It is a adaptive reuse for a hotel in this case, and it meets the various policy levels of the PPS, OP, secondary plan, and Heritage Conservation District plan. Alterations are to the side and rear are in compatible materials, and the proposed development of adjacent properties will again focus views on the main facade and keep its landmark status. Next slide, please. So this is a street view giving you an idea of how pedestrians would view it with ghosted in elements of proposed buildings in the immediate vicinity. So the tower portion is very much set back and above. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl, for that very in-depth presentation. Do we have any questions from the committee for Carl and the rest of the applicant team? And I see that Member Conforti has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you, Carl, for that great presentation. It was really nice to learn a little bit more about that building. I worked actually with very close by, so I'm familiar with the site, but I didn't know all of that history, so thank you. I had a question with, you mentioned that the existing windows are actually form part of the structure, so I just was wondering with the new windows and some of the masonry work that you're going to be doing, like will you be adding lintels or any structural elements to sort of take that structural load off of the replacement windows?
No, it's my understanding, but I'm going to pass that over to Brian, the architect, for more detail on that. Brian?
Yeah, no, they are embedded in, the steel is embedded into the anchor, into the sidewalls, which make it almost impossible to remove them without destroying them. So that's the first problem. But in terms of the structure of the stone above and everything else, it's not affected at all by that. It's supported separately.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for the applicant team? Seeing none, thank you so much for your deputation this morning. And we have one more registered speaker, David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This application seeks to provide an adaptive reuse and conservation rehabilitation for a significant early 20th century commercial industrial building in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District, covered under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. It is encouraging to find a developer who has a commitment to rehabilitation, adaptive reuse, and conservation of an existing property as a main component of a new development. The repurposed building will be integrated into the new residential hotel development that will face on both York and George Streets. The proposed development plan would indicate that the proponent has an understanding of the HCD guidelines and the importance of the approved standard guidelines in repurposing the building at 126 York Street, rather than merely preserving its facade. We are also pleased to learn that the applicant intends to apply for a Heritage Community Improvement Program grant. We therefore urge you to support the recommendations contained in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate your comments. Are there any questions for David? Seeing none, thank you for your deputation and your series of deputations today. They're always appreciated at this committee. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I don't see committee members, but I do see the ward councillor, our good friend, Councillor Fleury, who I think made a monumentous announcement this morning, which I'd like to acknowledge. So before we ask him to ask questions, I just want to really congratulate him for all the years of service that he has really dedicated to the city. And as well, he continues to do that work. So I'm sure we're going to hear from him, not just in a minute, but on a continuing basis. So I'll throw to my good friend, Matt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ralston. Really appreciate it. I'll certainly be vocal and continue to be active till the 14th of November. I'm really excited about this project for a number of reasons. I think it checks a number of boxes, and I'm sorry to say, for those on the Built Heritage Subcommittee, you're seeing my comment on the report and not necessarily specific to the heritage, and I want to apologize for that. We had assumed that all of those reports were coming simultaneously, which for timing purposes was not the case. So I just want to recognize that and reflect that. From a heritage point of view, it's rare that we go into public meetings in the Byward Market where there is a heritage building involved, and there is so much support from the community, particularly the Lower Town Community Association. So I think this is kudos to the thoughtful integration of that building to the new development site. And I think it goes well beyond that with treating both the York and the George Street facades as main entrances for their own purposes. So I commend the work. We'll be looking at its intent and making sure that what is in front of you today not only is achieved, but it is exceeded in the protection and reinvestment plans for that property. I believe, and maybe staff can correct me, I see Anne's on, but I do believe that there will be a follow-up proposal that will come to Built Heritage, not relating to the Major, but relating to the overlay for the area. But Anne, maybe I'm wrong. If you wouldn't mind clarifying the future approvals.
Yeah, that's okay. The heritage overlay is going to be addressed as part of the minor rezoning report, so that will go to planning committee. So it wouldn't be coming back in front of Built Heritage Subcommittee. Again,
thank you, Anne. Again, Chair and Committee, I really think it's a unique project. It's the type of project that we do need in an area like the Byward Market, mid-block, having both accesses on York and George, and particularly respecting the Major building. I know that heritage planning staff have been quite engaged for years in that area when you think of the Andaz, the build up to Andaz, and the most recent LPAT decision at the neighboring property. So I want to thank heritage staff for their diligence, and I want to thank the applicant. And I do want to put to record, it's fun to see architecture from out of town. I do think that the overall building does bring a Montreal flair, which the market will welcomes with open hand. And it's not a knock to local architecture, don't get me wrong, but it does bring unique opportunity for use of materials, shapes, lighting, and so on, that creates a nice synergy in an area where we will continue to see increased density, and where you could take an opportunity to redevelop some of the surface lots that have been long-standing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions and comments, and obviously we appreciate the input from the ward councillor. Any other questions for staff? And I see none. So do any of the members have any additional comments on this item? And I see that member Podolsky has raised his hand.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity just to say a few words about this. I'll be supporting the staff report. As an architect that has had a long career with my offices in the Byward Market, I know the Major building very well, having gone there for shopping at the food pantry, visited the Chez FM, and before that, you wouldn't remember this, but was Brandy's nightclub there in one of the wings. But it was always a warehouse building before that with a food base. And I think that the proposed redevelopment of the George Street side for residential and the full adaptive reuse of the Major warehouse for hotel use is an excellent use. And I really must commend the architects for stepping back seriously from the north end to the south end of the site to maintain the landmark statuses of the Major building. This is a big move. It's very, very welcome. It's not timid. It's bold, and maybe the architects are bringing some chutzpah to Ottawa that we may sometimes lack. So my compliments to them for this, and for Carl Bray's guidance in it, because I know he had a good hand in it as well. Having said that, I think that questions that might be asked on a land use planning side about the density and height of the building on George Street, this is part of the whole Byward Market Heritage Conservation Plan and strategy to maintain the low scale of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District and transfer the potential and hope for intensification to the eastern part of the district that we're now seeing on George Street and Cumberland Street. And this brings this brings people living in the Byward Market area, and will indirectly then support the revival of the Byward Market, the public realm plan, and the farmers base to the market. So I think that is a heritage comment, because we're approaching the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Byward Market, and I think projects like this, I think, are supportive and complementary. So I'll be supporting the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and I also see that Vice Chair Quinn has raised her hand as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, Barry said it very eloquently, so it doesn't bear repeating, other than to say that I fully support his comments, and to just congratulate the developer, the architects, city staff, the heritage advisor, because this is really exemplary, and I think a great example of the kind of intensification that we want to see, and that includes a full rehabilitation of the entire building, which is really wonderful. It's such a special place, and yes, I am able to say that I can remember going to Brandy's. Good times. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments. And apart from going to the bar, I want to echo them. As we've heard, I think that the applicant really should be commended, as well as the work of city staff and other heritage consultants who've really worked on this proposal. I think what's proposed here is an adaptive reuse, and which is excellent for the site, and that seeks the preservation of the entire property. Which will incorporate restoration work that includes the front decorative facade and portions of the east and west facades, including the terracotta inserts and brick paneling, as we had heard. As we also heard, this is a mid-block connection between York and George Streets that would ultimately provide access to the proposed hotel, which allows the front facade of the historic building to remain intact. And the applicant also intends to apply for a grant under the Heritage Community Improvement Program to assist with conservation costs. And a report will come before Built Heritage Subcommittee at a later date. With all these benefits and also the assurance of preservation of this built structure, which is of high heritage significance for the Byward market. Once again, I really do think that the applicant should be commended. And as a consequence, I'm extremely gratified to be able to support this application. Is the report carried?
Carried.
Carried. Excellent. So this report will be submitted to Planning Committee on May 12th, 2022.
Okay.
There are no in-camera items. There are to date no notices of motion. And we do not have any formal inquiries in front of us. Is there any, oh, I see that Councillor Fleury has raised his hand, sorry.
Chair, I apologize. I don't want to miss the quorum. I just wanted to clarify 197 was in front of you earlier.
Yes, it was. And I did mention, Councillor Fleury, that you were in support of that report, and that report was approved.
I apologize. I should know. Thank you.
No problem. So is there any other business? Seeing none, on adjournment, is the motion carried?
Carried.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And the next regular meeting will be held on Monday, June 20th, 2022. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Chair.
everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.